So after the first and second video on Docker, we're now diving into Docker Compose, which is the closest thing we have to straight up sorcery. I mean, Docker is great and stuff, but man, when you get Docker Compose going, it feels like magic, even when you know exactly how it works. So let's see what we're building today. We're gonna have our terminal here, and we're just gonna kick it off in here. I have actually 4 files. I'm gonna delete all of them. We're gonna start from scratch. Gonna have no just an empty directory with no files, but really what we need is just a docker compose.yaml file. Once you have that file, all we need to do later is to just call docker compose up. And you could run that in detached mode so you don't have to see the logs and stuff. For now, we haven't written the Docker Compose file, but I just want to show you the end product, show you what we're building towards. And then later we're going to actually write this from scratch. We're going to just create a blank new directory and do it from scratch. But just to show you the sorcery so that you can take a look at how awesome Docker Compose is, right? So I'm going to run that in detached mode. I'm going to press enter and it's going to say running 3.0. In fact, I think it might have been because I didn't close it down yet. So let me do it. Docker Compose down, close all of that. So Docker Compose up and down, Docker Compose up just looks for a docker compose.yaml file. You could have this in other names and then you specify that using the path. But for now, right, let's just name it docker compose.yaml. So it looks for that one specific file. If it has that file, then all you need to do is to just say docker compose up. If you don't want to run it in detached mode, you don't have to put a dash flag. But let's just run it with the D option, the detached mode option. So let's run that, and it's going to set up 4 things together. It's going to set up first the network, and then it's going to set up the 3 different containers. So if I show you my Docker Compose file in a second and we'll do that and we write our code together, then you see how all of that magic happens. But once I have that, now if I go into my WordPress, run the localhost, you could see that WordPress is set up. So let me just show you really quickly what it is, and I'm going to use bat for that. I'm going to say docker compose.yaml, and in here you see that there is the first container is the WordPress. It's the WordPress latest image, the latest version of WordPress, and it exposed the port from 80 to 8080 on 80 on the container, 8080 on the host. So I have to go to localhost and put it to port 8083, and that's how I 443. That's the SSL version, the HTTPS version. I'm going to explain about that later. Then I set up some environment variables. Then the second thing I have is the MySQL container, and this is just a basically just my MySQL 5.7 version. And then the last thing is the phpMyAdmin. So this is exposed on an 8084. So I can also go into there, go into localhost, and I could put in 8084, and it's gonna ask me for username and password. I have my username and password in here, so I'm gonna just pass both of them in there. I'm going to say Samuel, and I'm going to say wp-doc, and just run that, and it's going to bring me into my phpMyAdmin, right? So this is really cool with just one line of command. If I'm done with all of that, I don't need them anymore. All I need to do is to say docker compose down. So this makes it really easy to just sort of architect all these services, put them together, and then manage all this infrastructure as code. So infrastructure as code is kind of the paradigm, and we're just going to bring it down right now. And I'm going to delete this directory, and we're going to start from scratch again, just to see how do we compose this file, how do we alter this Docker Compose file, and what are the main mental models to think about that, right? So I'm going to close out my camera right now, and I'm going to go into the code and just walk you through it one by one. Okay, so let's move back to WordPress. I want to bring all of that down. So Docker Compose down, can bring all of that down. And if I refresh the page, okay, it's gone. If I refresh this page, it's also gone because none of them, all of these containers are down. So let me do a Docker Compose PS. And here it's kind of like Docker PS, right? Docker PS shows you all the running containers, but Docker Compose PS basically shows you all the running containers that are managed by your Compose architecture. We have an empty directory, so we're going to start from this point, right? Just a bare bones, nothing. So what did I say earlier? I said that when you run Docker Compose, and by the way, when I talk about Docker Compose, you will see me use this command. And if you watch some other videos, a lot of them still uses the docker-compose, right? So Docker Compose is the one I'm using, and this is the latest version of Docker Compose. It's Docker Compose version 2. Okay, version 2. So this is actually quite recent. Compose v2 general availability. And so by the time you're watching this, by the time it's done editing and stuff, it's probably going to be November. So November of 2022 and 2022. So there is really no reason to be stuck at using something old anymore. So there's a lot of advantages, there's a lot of benefits. I'm going to leave a link there, you can read about that. Fast delivery of new features within the Docker CLI, support for GPU machines, seamless path to production, creating a homogeneous Docker ecosystem in Go. There's a lot of other things here, there's a very heavy content in here, but I'm not going to go into any of that. But the thing is, if you want to use the latest version, and you know that by just typing Docker Compose version, and this is v2 2.11, right? A good hint that you're following along the latest version of Docker Compose tutorial is when you see the video doesn't use docker-compose syntax. it doesn't use this syntax, but rather it used the docker space compose syntax. So that's how you know you're probably following a very up-to-date tutorial. So we're going to be using the latest version, v2. In this case here, it's actually v2.11.0. So if you want to actually follow along, go ahead and download the latest version of Docker Compose. It's the v2 version, not the v1, not the legacy version. And again, like I said, most likely you're watching this video in November of 2022. So just do a quick check and see that you're on version 2 and above, right? That's good enough. So when you call Docker Compose up, what happened is Docker Compose would have to look for a file, and the file conventionally is called docker compose.yaml. So you need to do something like maybe create that in Visual Studio Code. You can do them in Nano, in Vim, whatever, right? So just give it a name. Docker compose.yaml is good enough. For me, I'm just going to create it in Vim because you can see it on my screen. It's more real estate. It's easier to see. And I'm going to also change directory to my downloads, and I'm also going to change into my this is WordPress doc. So I'm gonna show you how to run a WordPress along with a MySQL, along with phpMyAdmin, all of these different things. Traditionally, it takes so much time to set up all of this stuff, right? Every time you want to do some development, you need to set up, run MySQL in the background, have a database server running, you need to have your phpMyAdmin running, you have to set up WordPress running. There's so many things going on. Then the PHP server, and then there's usually they call it the LAMP stack, the Linux, the Apache, and MySQL, and then the PHP. But in this case here, just using Docker, we don't even need to do any of that. We just have to say Docker Compose up. It sets up all of those different services for us, which is great, tremendous, right? So let's go back here. I'm going to create a file called vim docker compose.yaml. You should create that in Visual Studio Code if you're more comfortable with that. So the first thing in docker compose.yaml is you want to specify a version. So what version of Docker Compose specification are you going to be using? So in this case here, you can say version and you pass in a version. So in this case here, let's just use version 3. If you want to look at all the different versions, the file versions, you could look at this one and it gives you all the different file versioning. The major version, the last major version is version 3. So that's the one I'll be using. Of course, if there is a reason, if you're following a tutorial and they're using an older version of Docker Compose, then you want to change that, right? Then I'm going to have the different services that are defined in here. Each services would just be a container, right? So each one of these services would then find a way to interact with the other services. So what did I say earlier? I want to have so set up Vim, WordPress, and then I want to have my MySQL, and then finally I want to have my phpMyAdmin, right? So let's actually try to not be so ambitious. Let's actually try to have this with just the 2 version first, and then have the third one coming in later, right? So let's just have the first WordPress and the MySQL. So how would we do that? So the first thing we want to set up is WordPress. So let's do WordPress. You can name this service anything you want, but because I'm gonna pull from Docker Hub WordPress, I want to just name it WordPress. But if you want your service to be a different name, sometimes a very common paradigm is to name this as like web, for example. So you could say something like web, and then you could have like what is in the web, and you can say what is this images and stuff. But in this case here, I don't want to do that. I want to actually call it WordPress. So I'm going to say WordPress, and then docker compose.yaml. If you never used the YAML before, now YAML is very strict on the tabbing and spacing. So when you see me do tab, you actually want to do tab. You don't want to try and sometimes use tab, sometimes use spaces. You don't want to confuse and mix them out around like that. They're actually very strict. If you use tab, and you should use that, just tab along, and then I say image. This is where I specify from Docker Hub. So if you go to Docker Hub very quickly, search for dockerhub.com and then search for WordPress, you will find all the different WordPress images you can pull from it. And I know that there is an official image, WordPress image, that is on there. So this is the official version. It's not by Bitnami or by Rapidfort, it's just WordPress. That's the verified content, that's the official one. So here it says Docker pull WordPress. So this is the image you want to pass in, so you just say WordPress, okay? And then you want to specify a port because you want to be able to access that from your host. So I'm going to say ports, and you want to map your ports. So I'm going to have my, here I'm going to say 80, I guess 8081 is fine. And in the container, that will be 80. So I'll say from the container, if it's 80, you want to expose that so that you can see that on your own host machine, right? And then finally, you need a few environment for WordPress. Okay, this is the database you should look for. And then the next thing I want to have is my MySQL service. So again, remember to not mess up the tab here. So we want to see how I indent the different code here, right? So MySQL, it needs an image as well. So we need to specify an image. So you could search for an image directly in here as well. Just search for MySQL and you can just pull from one of them. I'm probably just gonna stick to MySQL, and I'm gonna use the version 5.7 because that's very common as well. And then I'm gonna also have my environment just like what I did above. So what do I have in my environment? I have my MySQL database, and here I want to call it WordPress because then I have this database, and WordPress is going to use the same database. You can name it anything you want, right? This is kind of like, this is why I said it's kind of your entire tech stack as a code base, something that you can version control, which is great, right? So I'm going to have my MySQL, and I'm going to call it WP-doc. One thing about this is that I want to specify a volume so that I could map whatever is happening. I explained about this in my earlier videos. If you didn't watch my earlier Docker video, you probably want to watch that one as well. But I talk about volumes, and you can use volume to say whatever is happening in the container, you want to map that back into your host. So this is your host machine, and I want to map it into my current directory. So this is a dot, the current directory. So when you see a dot, when you see a dot, that's basically the current directory on my host machine. So where is that? Quit that out. It's currently in my downloads WP-doc, right? So this is actually referring to that directory because that's where my Docker Compose file is going to be sitting in. So that's referring to that, to the downloads WordPress doc, right? So I want this to be in there, and I want to create a subdirectory so I don't throw everything into the top parent directory. So I'm going to say that, and I want to map this to whatever is happening in raw library MySQL. So this is where the MySQL is going to have all its files. I want that to also be exposed to my host machine, and then there is a two-way sync in here. So any changes in here would also be reflected in here, and that's also one way of persisting everything that happens in the database. So when I tear down the container and I boot it up again, I don't have to recreate the whole thing. I don't lose my post, my blog, I don't lose my author, I don't lose any of my tables. All of that will still be in there. All right. So this is kind of just a way to have some sort of data persistence, because Docker by default will tear down and completely destroy everything in there. It's ephemeral. So in this case, I'm just saying that the database should at least be persisted to a physical space on my computer, right? Now, this is good, but how do you get WordPress to talk to MySQL? How do you get these two different containers to talk to each other? So the way you get these two different services to talk to each other, these two separate containers to talk to each other, is to specify something called the networks, right? So you probably also learned that in my earlier videos. I'm not sure if I gone into that yet, but here I'm going to just give it a network, and I'm going to just give it a name, and I'm going to call it WordPress network. You can call it anything you want, honestly. You have the networks, and you define one network, which is WordPress network. Then what you want to do is to go up to your WordPress service, and you also want to specify that this should be connected to that network. This is how you make them talk to each other. And that's how you have two of them running. All right. So I'm going to save all of this. So do a quick list, see that there is file, the file is in there. I could do a quick bat to see that everything is running. So I have my version 3, I have all of this. Okay, great. So now what you need to do is to just do a Docker compose up. And I want to run that in detached mode, so let's do that. Okay, it says additional property WP network is not allowed. So I messed up something in here, and it's most likely because of the indentation. So I kind of see that coming. So what we need to do is to fix that, save, get back up there, run again. Okay, now it's created, now it's starting, and now everything is running. We could check now if we navigate to the port 8081, because we exposed that to the host 8081. So let's run that. Okay, we already have a different service running in there. So I guess I want to change this to 8085, I guess. Just save that, compose down. See, the problem is I set up a lot of things to be running at the moment. So I'm going to try this again. Docker compose up, detach mode. Okay, now I'm going to go to 8085. Okay, error establishing a database connection, that's okay. And the reason I'm saying this is okay is because at least you know that the WordPress service is running. What I suspect now is that the WordPress, because I define WordPress up here, MySQL up here, generally you can define them in any order you want, but the problem I have here is that WordPress is first created without MySQL having created first, right? So what you want to have is that this MySQL container should be created first, and then the WordPress container should be created subsequently following the successful creation of this container. All right, so let's go ahead and see how do we change our Docker Compose file to make that happen. And the first thing I want to do is, actually we have the ports. I guess between the ports and the environment, we could have another one here. I could say something like depends on. And depends on is going to say something like put in a list of all the different services. So if I have multiple services, I can have multiple of them. So in this case here, I only have one, which is MySQL. And what this is going to say is you want to make sure you're telling Docker to, hey, create this container first, because this WordPress service depend on the MySQL service. So go ahead, why don't you create this first, and then create this following the successful creation of this, because this has a dependency on MySQL. So I'm going to go ahead and either do a docker compose down, do a quick list, remove the MySQL because things are already created. So I need to do a sudo MySQL Okay, now I'm doing the docker compose up without running in detached mode so that I can at least see the logs printing out. So this is the same as docker compose up, except I don't have the -d option, so that is not going to run in detached mode. I can at least see all of this happening. So let me go and refresh my page, and you see that if you look at the logs here without running in detached mode, you see WordPress doc, WordPress 1, this is the service, the WordPress. So it gave you the name of the container, the directory, so WordPress doc, and then the WordPress, this is the name of the service, and then it attached the -1, because what if you have multiple of them, right? And here it's successful. It's running 172.30.3101. This is all good. It's running in localhost. It's exposed to localhost 8085. I could do that. But then if you look at the MySQL logs, it says here that there is an access denied for user Samuel at 172.3103. And so my initial intuition is that I could maybe try to change all of this into just maybe have this as root, because that's the default user, so it would try to access using user. And then, well, in that case, this would also have to change. It would have to be root, and I would have to save that. Then I could stop the container. So it's stopping all the container. You could just Control-C to do that. Make sure nothing is running. Docker compose up again. And now it's running. So so my intuition was right, is that you can either do that, right? So you have a user, you have to put in root because you're not creating any user. So either you do that, or we will see the second way. The second way is to actually have something where you define a user as well. So in your MySQL, you want to have something like MySQL user. So you could pass in your name, and then you can pass in your password. In that case, now it will work. As long as you have a user, you create a Samuel user, then you can use Samuel up there. But if you don't, then the initial account that was created, a user account was created for you, is going to be root. All right. So I'm gonna show you this later on. Right now I'm just gonna stick to root because I can at least show you what's happening on my screen now. So WordPress is successful, it's connected. The other takeaway here is that when you need to troubleshoot something, just don't run it in detached mode. Or you could just run it in detached and then go into the TTY. So just go into run it with -it. So do a docker run and then -it, get in there, and then look at the logs. There's so many ways to troubleshoot that. But generally, with just throwing out the detach, you could see all of these logs being printed out, and that's how you troubleshoot it. So that's how I figure out. So I have WordPress installed. Let's just go ahead and create a few articles and a few posts, one post at least, to know that our volume is working, right? Because we want to test our volume. So I'm going to click English. I'm going to say continue. Have to readjust my screen so you can see the whole thing. Make sure that you see my full screen. I'm going to give it a site name. I'm just going to call it supertype.ai. That's kind of my current website. So supertype.ai, that's kind of the data science consultancy that I'm running. And I'm going to just call it supertype. And username, I'm going to give it a name as well. I'm going to just call it Samuel. And password, I'm just going to copy it somewhere. I don't know where, but I'm just going to copy that, create a note, and just paste it in. Change the layout so you could see. I want to say that this is the password. Put them somewhere because I can then log in again. And I want to put the username is my name, so Samuel, right? So just copy them somewhere because I don't want to lose it. I don't want to have to copy them anywhere else. So just going to keep it like that. Email, I don't know, just put in my email, I guess. But if I put my email in here, just please guys, please don't spam me. But this is my actual email, so I'm going to say, okay, search engine, I don't really care. I'm just going to go ahead and install. And I can see that it's confirmed that as well. You will see that there is a new account being created in your logs. I'm going to click on login now, and I'm going to put in my username. So this is where I'm glad I copied that. All right. And I'm going to pass in Samuel. And I'm going to just say login. And everything should still work. And I would still be able to create an article and stuff. Let me just go ahead and just look at my post. I have one post here. I'm going to just quickly edit that. And I want to say, welcome to the best company ever. Right? And hello world is fine. Let me just update that, and let me just go do a quick edit. Okay, this is all cool. Supertype.ai is a full cycle data science consultancy, and I want to update that. And when I'm done, I'm doing all of this to make sure that all of this stuff is persisted. So here I go. Supertype AI, welcome to the best company ever. Supertype.ai is a full cycle data science consultancy. All right, that's pretty good. If you go to the homepage, I can see that there is a post, welcome to the best company ever. All right, so I'm gonna keep at this page now, and I'm gonna try to do a Docker Compose down. Now what's gonna happen is that if I do a Docker Compose stop, it's gonna stop the container, but I want to bring the whole thing down. I want to completely destroy that. So now it's stopping. So this is all stopping, right? And I say Docker Compose, and I do a list. I could see that nothing is running. You could do a Docker Compose down as well. That would just bring down the entire thing. Now it's all just removed. Okay, all of these are just removed now. But if I look at my ls, you see that I actually have my folder MySQL. Now I didn't create the MySQL folder. Remember, I didn't create that. We started off deleting all of the files, all of the folders. We only created the file dockercompose.yaml. So where did MySQL come from? Now it created when Docker Compose initialized. So in the volumes tab, in this volumes configuration, we're actually saying that whatever happened in the MySQL, right, we want to expose that to our host machine current directory and a subdirectory called MySQL. So in this case here, this is our host machine, this is our current directory, and then our subdirectory is called MySQL. So it's saying that take this and expose everything that is into this. So anytime we make changes, let's actually move, let's do a list. You see all of these changes in here. Now, if we make any changes at all, or if we use up our local database and make a connection to it and add some data to it and stuff, now those are also going to be reflected on here. So we're now creating a two-way sync between the container and the host machine, right? If all of this is very confusing, you probably want to watch my first video about Docker. That walks you through the whole Docker architecture step by step without throwing you directly into Docker Compose. But here I'm just assuming you have those basics, and I'm just kind of trying to juggle your memory a little bit and help you refresh some of the key concepts in here. So if all of this is working, now remember we have destroyed and removed our containers, right? We remove our network, we remove our container, we remove our container. What's going to happen is if I take a look at Docker network list, you will see that WP network is already removed, and so it doesn't appear in there anymore, but it still has the default, but it doesn't have the network anymore, right? And so what we're going to do now is we're going to try to do a Docker Compose up. If all of this works, let's make sure that we can't refresh this page anymore. Hit enter. Okay, this site is not connected anymore because there is nothing on port 8085 anymore, right? Because we just brought it down, we destroyed that, we removed it. But if we do a Docker Compose up again, this time I want to run in detached mode, then if everything goes to plan, the volume, this MySQL is going to look at the host itself and it's going to get data from that, because this is how we do the persistent storage. We covered that in our last video. So let's try and run that. Created, good. Started, great. All right, let's run, let's refresh the page, bam, everything still works, everything still happens. So let's look at wp-admin, and we can still log in, we can still have our username, and we can still copy this, and we can pass name, login, and now we're still back in there. We go into our post, we can still see this. You can click on view, you can still see the articles, and you can see one response to welcome to the best company ever, right? And we could change this and we can modify that. We have the author and stuff. This is all good because the volumes is working, all right? So typically when you use a database container, you have MySQL, Postgre, you want to map volumes, and this is one example of how to do that in a very practical hands-on example. So I didn't really go into all the theories about how it works and all the conceptual mental models, but if you want that, I recommend you watch the earlier video. So this video is really just hands-on, just showing you how to put everything together using Docker Compose. So let's future-proof this a little bit. Let's think about how do we go to production from here, right? So maybe the first thing I want to do is maybe change the version from 3 to maybe the latest version. I guess the latest version is 3.7, 3.8, 3.8, right? So let's go ahead, just change that to 3.8. I'm gonna add a few more things here up and there, but let's move it to 3.8. And we're gonna maybe set it up for production. WordPress by default, it's ready to use the HTTPS URLs if the web server is properly configured. So the default port for URL, for HTTP URL is port 80. That's why we have the port mapping in here. But the default port for HTTPS is port 443. And this is something you can Google and you can find out on your own. But so I want to have the HTTP and I want to also have my other port. So I want to say this. Then I want to have the port mapping 443 mapped to the container 443, right? So 443 is basically the default port for HTTPS, right? So let's map both of these ports. If you want to inspect the database from the host machine, you also want to map the port for the MySQL service. So this is also a good time to sort of do that as well. So in this is the MySQL. If you want to actually make connections to a database, you want to expose the port onto your local host, you can do that. And you do that using ports. And you say 3307, 33 3306. Now you could use 3306 to 3306, but I suspect that I have something running on my local host machine as well. So 3306 is probably already occupied. It's probably busy. So just for safe measure, I map it to 3307. But it's up to you how you want to do your port mapping. All right. Just for good measure, I'm just gonna say 3306, 3307. You don't really need the quotation, but I guess just want to be consistent. Might as well do that, because up there above I also have my quotation marks. And I said that I will show you, what if you don't want to use root? What if you don't want to use root for everything? Because that's just not very good practice, is it? You want to actually have a different username. You want to do things as a different user, not as a root. So how would you do that? So you have your database and you have your root password. So all you need to do is to create a MySQL user and pass in Samuel. Okay, you can pass in your own name if you're following this tutorial, and you can also pass in your password. Now in this password, I'm going to say wp-doc. Okay. So remember, this is my user, Samuel, this is my password, WordPress doc, and this is different from my root, where my root itself, I have WordPress doc root, that's the root itself, and then the username is root, okay, that's different. And if you want to change that up there, now you can. So CW to change word, and you just have to put in your name, get back here, CW to change word, $, to delete everything to the end, and then you just want to pass in password. So now I'm not using root anymore. I'm actually using Samuel and WordPress doc, which I will argue is a probably better design, is a probably more secured, probably more robust design than to do everything as root. So what else can we do to future-proof this, to make this a bit more robust? Maybe just to throw in some extra bells and whistles, because Docker really feels like magic like that, right? Let's also add an extra container running phpMyAdmin, right? So let's go ahead and do phpMyAdmin. So there is a first service. The name of the service is WordPress. Then the second service is MySQL, and we're gonna go all the way up here, add a third service, and the third service would just be called phpMyAdmin. Now phpMyAdmin is a great, almost essential tool for anyone building websites with WordPress or any software using MySQL. It gives you all the necessary tools to handle the administration of MySQL within a web interface. So later on, we could also open up a web interface and look at our database without having to actually connect to a database, using a CLI tool or something, right? So typical use cases for phpMyAdmin would include the management of the database, do some queries, do a full database search, or even to monitor your database server activity, right? So let's get started. Let's write our phpMyAdmin. So how do you do that? Just put in the name of the service. You could call it anything you want. You could put PMA, which stands for phpMyAdmin. I'm just going to put the whole thing out there because I'm not too lazy to type this out. You want to specify where to pull this from, okay? So in my case, I'm going to pull it from phpMyAdmin. This is phpMyAdmin, and you can do a docker pull phpMyAdmin. That would work. The older versions would just ask you to do a phpMyAdmin, and then there is another one, phpMyAdmin. You can also do that. So like this one, community, for example, this is maintained by the community. This is different from this one. So you do any official Docker image, it would be up there. Without you don't have this structure. You just have like one name like that. But this is the community maintained version. It says that note that since phpMyAdmin has been accepted to the official Docker Hub repository, you can either use this or the older one for your Docker installation. So in this case here, I'm just going to use this phpMyAdmin. phpMyAdmin. And you want to remember that because phpMyAdmin is a set of tools, a web-based tools for you to administer your database, to manage your databases. So obviously you also want to run this after your MySQL has been created. So kind of the same ideas there. So you want to use depends on as well, right? You want to say that, wait, make sure that you run the other container first. Make sure that has existed, create that first, and then come and create this. So what this is going to say is to go back to MySQL. It said create this container first. This container should exist because the phpMyAdmin service depends on that, right? So same as the web service, same as the WordPress service, right? Do you want to use this on your host machine? If you want to, then the probably good idea is to map the port as well. So I'm going to just go ahead and say ports and do the ports mapping. Hopefully some of this is starting to get very familiar to you. In this case here, let's see. We have our 8085, so I want to have 8086 here. So 8086, I want to map this to port 80. So whatever is happening in the container port 80, I want to map that to 8086 on my host. All right. And finally, I want to have a few environment variables. So environment. So the first thing you need for phpMyAdmin is the PMA. PHP stands for phpMyAdmin, and you want to set the host. And this depends on what? This depends on MySQL. Okay. Then the next one is the user. So I want to say MySQL user. Again, you don't want to do things by using root if you can. So I'm going to use my name, Samuel, and I want to put in my MySQL password. And in this case here, my MySQL password would just be my WordPress doc. So I'm going to say WordPress doc. I need a root password. Okay, so root password, and that is just going to come out from line 19. So that's the WordPress doc root, right? Because you need to be able to show that you're a root user in order for you to do things like dropping the database and dropping the table and all of those things, right? What else do we lack? Oh, see that all of them are talking to each other through the networks. So we have this networks, right? So you probably want to also copy that, just paste it. So now it's more ready. We did a bit of refactoring. It's a little bit better. I feel more secure. I feel more confident of my containers. I guess if I really want to nitpick, I guess another thing I could do, right? If I go back to my first screen, so look at the screen up here, and I do LS, I have my MySQL. This is basically a volume map, right? This is basically a name volume called MySQL, so that my container would always, the data from my container would always be persisted on this physical storage on my host machine. But wouldn't it be nice to also be able to do the same volume mapping, but for the code in WordPress? So if you want to change anything at all, want to maybe add a plugin, add an extension, we want to change the themes, we want to install a new whatever themes or whatever, right? Change the appearance of our website. We don't have to go into a Docker container. We could just modify that file. That would be nice, right? Because we just have to modify things, and it would do the mapping and map it back into the container. That would be lovely. So let's also maybe add a volume in here to map it to the WordPress source code itself, right? Maybe after networks, I want to add a volumes. In a way, you're doing a bind mount, right? This is something we spoke about. You're mounting the container directory that contains all of the WordPress code, and you want to mount that onto your host. So here I'm going to use the same pattern. I'm going to say tick that, find the local working directory. So that's working directory, current working directory. That's basically downloads WordPress doc. And I want to say tick the source. So basically you are going to create a new directory called src. Later once this is done, once we do a Docker Compose up, you're going to see a directory here called src. It's going to be source, and that is going to take all the data that it finds from var www.html. How do you find out all of this stuff? Well, you can either go and read up the docs, or you could, if you've done any kind of like WordPress development in the past, you would know that these are like var lib mysql and var lib html. That's something that a lot of WordPress developers, they sort of grew up with, so they know that. If you want to, you see this container coming out with the whole name, you could actually give it a name as well. You could change the container name itself. So you don't want to see the whole thing being very verbose for your liking. You could change that to container name, and you could give it like WordPress, for example. So it's not going to show the whole thing, it's just going to give it a container name for this container. Now I leave it for you to go and do the rest, do the same for the rest. All right, so I'm just going to say save right now, and just save, list everything. If I do a Docker compose ls, okay, there is still something running. So if I were to refresh the page, it still works. I need to bring that down first. So I'm going to say Docker compose. Okay, and if I refresh the page, okay, now it's not working anymore. That's great. That's exactly what we want. And if we do a Docker compose ls, see, nothing is running. Cool. I guess you can do it -a to see everything, that you can see that this is exited. All right, and the config file is from here. So my folder, downloads, WordPress doc, and a Docker compose YAML. So it's using these to orchestrate all of that. And now that it has been exited, we could go ahead and do a Docker compose up. In this case here, I'm not going to run it in detached mode because I'm looking at I want to look at the changes, because now I added some stuff. I want to see if that will help me troubleshoot if I see anything. And you're seeing that it's go ahead and perform all of this downloading for you, because you need to get the phpMyAdmin. So it needs to download the phpMyAdmin, create some space so they can see all of this. It might take a while because it's looking at phpMyAdmin and it's trying to download anything that it doesn't have on your host machine. Okay, everything is done. If I go back to 8085, okay, now it says access denied for user, and I suspect that's because we still have our database folder there that we mapped, so we need to probably do a clean delete there and then start this again. So let's do an ls. You see that the source folder has been created. If I print source folder, you see that all of these are WordPress files. So you could see the WordPress features that handled by the blog header, handled by the comments, dash post, and then the content itself contains a lot of other things. So I could say list source WordPress content, and you see the plugins and you see the themes. And if I show you the themes, you see that there are the default themes 2020, 2021, 2022, and you can install more themes on it. And every time you install a new theme, it would all be mapped back to this one, and that's really, really great. If you kind of like using WordPress, doing any kind of WordPress development, this is fantastic. You could just drag and drop, download a new WordPress theme, drag and drop in here, and basically use the new theme. All right. but I also want to see that my current MySQL that contains the old data, and I'm actually trying to log in using my old data, so that's kind of probably problematic. So I want to delete that first. MySQL sudo and now it's working again, right? So once I deleted that folder because of the volume mapping, once I deleted that, now I get to recreate a new one, and this time I'm gonna log in using Samuel. So I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'm gonna say supertype AI, install WordPress. Okay, I can log in now. 6bj. Okay, that looks about right. SIX, that's x1x, bj, kg. So that's about right. So I'm gonna log in, and now we're back in here. So I'm gonna go into my post and edit something. I said supertype AI, update that, do a quick view. You can see supertype.ai, it's great. I can change the settings of my website. I could add a few description. I could say the tagline, research and development center. For all kind of like machine learning kind of things, we do a lot of like data engineering, data science work, analytics, analytics development, any kind of consultancy. We do a lot of that. So just gonna add a tagline here. And what else do I want to change here? I want to save changes right here, right away. Let's try and now see if our phpMyAdmin is running. So phpMyAdmin, if it runs, it should be exposed from port 80 to 8086. So let's go ahead and change all of this and say localhost 8086. It does need a username and a password, so you want to pass in a username and you want to pass a password. And now it's running. And now if you take a look at the WordPress and you look at the comments, you will see all these comments. So the first comment here, you see that there is a WordPress commenter said, "Hi, this is a command to get started with moderating, editing, and deleting comments. Please visit the comment screen in the dashboard." Now you could go ahead here, and because this is all your databases, these are all your different tables. So your databases, this is a database called WordPress, and you get that from where? From when you create MySQL, you say MySQL database, you say WordPress. So that's where you get it from. And it's gonna use that table to populate all the different tables. It's gonna use the database to populate all the tables. And so one of the tables is the comments. And now this is the comments. If I edit that, you could see it being, you say, instead of a WordPress commenter, I wanna say a supertype customer. Okay, that's the name of my agency. And I'm gonna just say clients at supertype.ai. I love what you guys are doing. Okay, very positive comment. Almost never happened, but you could just say save and then go back to previous page. So let's go. So it's gonna say update WordPress comments, set comment author. So this is a very basic SQL statement to update the table. Update the table to do what? To set comment author as this, where the comment ID equals to 1. So it's gonna say update, basically update something in the database, right? Set what? Set the comment author to be this, set the comment author email to be this, and set the comment content to be this. Finally, you don't want to set this on all the tables. You don't want to set this on all the rows. You want to set this only when the row equals to 1. All right. And if we go back to our main page, and we refresh this page, you see that a supertype customer says, "Hi, this is a comment. I love what you guys are doing." That's great. And if you go into your comment section, click on comments, you say that this is, "Hi, this is a comment. I love what you guys are doing." And you see the post, you see you can approve this, you can spam this, you can trash this. And that's really, really great. See, there is the plugins and there's the themes, right? If you install any plugins, you could look at the plugins. Let's do a quick one. You see there's the Akismet. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but if you look at your plugins and you look at install plugins, that's where you have the Akismet. And then there is the Hello, which is Hello Dolly. But if you want to have more, you could either add here, or if you download anything from a third-party source, for example, you could also bring that into this. And whatever you drag into this folder, so if you do a move and then you drag something in here, it will be reflected in here as well, and you can pick them. So I want to just maybe choose one. So let's just pick this one, Neve. I don't know if you even pronounced that correctly, but I'm just gonna say download. I could move recursively. Move from my downloads folder. There is a file that is a theme that I just downloaded. Name is Neve, I believe. I want to move it to my current directory into the themes folder. Don't need the R flag. Okay, you do need to do a sudo, I believe then. Change that. Okay, now I have 4 different themes. Neve 2020, 2021, 2022, and now I could close this one out, go back to my plugins, look at my appearance, look at my themes, and what have you. You have the 2022, 2021, 2020, and then you have Neve. Awesome. So we can do a live preview if we like what we see. So we have an awesome research and development center. Okay, obviously there's nothing in here because there's no images and stuff. But clicking to it, this is how it looks like now. There's a new theme. There's no images and stuff, but obviously the new theme works, and if I want to, I could just activate and done. Alright, so then I just have to add my images and stuff because otherwise there's nothing to see here. But there you see it, the two-way sync, right? So easy to now modify stuff. If you find a new theme, you want to add them to it, you could just change the theme, and then from there, and if you want to add more themes, you could just click on add new, and you can just find new themes in here. You can just activate and install new themes directly from here, or you could just do it the way I just showed you because of the volume mapping and because of the bind mounts, right? And doesn't that just feel like magic? The fact that you could just run a service up and just say Docker Compose up, and how much time does it take for you to run the whole thing up? Then now you have a MySQL running, you have a phpMyAdmin, you could manage all of your posts here. You can see your post in here. Welcome to WordPress, supertype.ai. You could modify things. You have your database connected to all the different services between phpMyAdmin and your WordPress. Then you have your WordPress running, and then you could do your development by just doing a bind mount, mounting everything in the source over to your host container. And now you can just add files in there, change files, use Weave, use Visual Studio Code. Isn't that just awesome? So to just give you a summary of what we just learned, Docker Compose is a tool for running multi-container applications on Docker. So we have 3 containers, we could just have all of them running together, and this is like the orchestration of that, defined using the compose file format. This is the YAML file format, right? And the compose file is used to define how one or more containers that make up the application are configured. How do they speak to each other using networking and stuff? How do they do volumes? How do they mounting and stuff? And a lot of those things, initially, if you want to just use Docker, you could say Docker run, and then you could also pass in things like name, and then you can pass in the D, the port mapping and stuff, the volume mapping and stuff. And you've seen that in my other videos. But it turns out there is a cleaner way to do all of that, and that's just using Docker Compose. And it allows you to just specify all the configuration without you having to have this multi-line crazy stuff that you see in the earlier video, right? And Docker Compose v2 is a major version bound release of Docker Compose. It has been rewritten. You could look at the docs for some comparison about how Compose v2 differ from the initial Compose version 1. But really the important stuff are all, just covered in this video already. So read some of the docs, and this would speed up so much of a development, and it's so much more maintainable, and deployment is so easy because everything is really defined as a code level, and you can, because all of this are right there, it's just a simple file. You could basically set up version control to make sure that anytime you make changes, all of this configuration, they are logged onto GitHub, right? And I think that's the reason why Docker is almost ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Every company, no matter where you work for, whether you're working in the data science field, data engineering, or software engineering, no matter where you work, so far you've learned how to use Docker, you learn how to use Docker Compose. That's great. So go ahead and try and use the newfound skills to create new projects and try to bring some of this into your existing workflow. So if you're used to doing things in running different services and stuff, try and just use Docker and Docker Compose to try and bring them together in this architecture as code paradigm. So I hope you learned something new. I'll see you in the next video.